As a child, I grew up in the barangay of Santa Isabel on the island of Negros Occidental in the Philippines. Our island was known as the sugar bowl of the world, and the long green and golden stalks could be seen no matter where you went. On this certain day, the day was oppressive. Heat streamed down and it spread across the ground, searching for any area to cool down. There was no reprieve, even in the shade of the majestic palm trees. My parents asked me to go to the sugarcane fields and collect some vegetables from our little farm. The farm was roughly an hour's walk, and I wanted to go there with someone, as I hated going there by myself. Resigned to making the long journey by myself, I started walking. The hot sun was a harsh mistress. Her rays stung me as I walked. My rubber slippers slapped against the back of my heels. It reminded me of the old men riding the caravel, their whips cracking on the gentle beast's back as they ploughed the rice fields. Up ahead, a familiar shape came into view. It was my friend. She was happily skipping towards me. She looked like she didn't have a care in the world, as her dark, brown hair swayed back and forth over her eyes as she skipped. When she was close enough to me, I asked her if she wanted to keep me company as I went to the farm. She nodded and smiled at me. We grew our vegetables near the sugarcane fields because of the rich soil and the ample water supply. My father was proud of his vegetable farm and how delicious the vegetables were. Time passed quickly as we joked and played on the way to the farm. Rows of sugarcane were everywhere, and finally, we couldn't help but to reach out. I took hold of one of the slender stalks, pulling it with all my might until there was an almighty loud crack, and a large section of it broke off. Holding up my trophy, I quickly placed it to my mouth and started sucking on the stalk, and I was rewarded by the sweetest juice inside. Finally, we're almost at our destination, and that's when we saw her. An old woman was kneeling next to the road. Her long, wiry hair was unkempt, and it reminded me of an old steel brush. Her skin was pale white and looked sickly. It was unusual for a Filipino to have white skin, as we're all brown. Her eyes were stained a deep red, almost like rusty metal. But what caught my attention was her hands and the long black fingernails that escaped from her fingertips. Her fingers moved in a jerking motion as she scratched at the ground frantically. Her eyes were intently staring at that spot where she dug. She stopped suddenly as her fingers twitched violently, and finally, they started to move again. Between her fingers was a dirty, brown worm. It struggled against its newfound fleshy prison. She raised it to her mouth and let go. The worm fell through the air. It tumbled downwards until it disappeared between her cracked, withered lips, almost in slow motion. I didn't even realize that the old woman was staring at me as she slurped down the worm. My friend and I hurried past the old woman. Her eyes never left mine for a moment, and there was a hunger to her stare. I caught a whiff of the old woman, and it reminded me of the scent of death. I wanted to pinch my nose to stop the smell. Quickly, we turned down one of the rows of the sugarcane, and we headed towards the farm. Once the old woman was out of sight, I could feel my anxiety starting to settle down. "Nini, can you wait here for me? I'm going to get some vegetables as well," my friend said, with a cheeky smile. She disappeared into the maze of stalks, and I was alone again. Squatting down, I started to grab as many vegetables as I could. I didn't want to be here for any longer than what I needed to. Silence. There was no sound at all. Nothing. I could feel my skin starting to crawl. It was like that worm was slithering along the nape of my neck, and the slime of the tiny beast was slithering all over me. It felt disgusting. Like an animal being stalked, my sense of hearing was painful, and the cane behind me started to dance and sway. The rustling was so loud I wanted to scream. I tried to run, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, like my feet were nailed to the earth. No noise came from my throat as I tried to scream, not even a whimper. escaped my lips. The foliage parted, and long black fingernails pushed the golden stalks to the side. The sugarcane started to moan under her touch. It seemed like even the colour was being drained where the old woman's hands caressed. Her deformed face peeked out, and she was a few feet from me. The smell of rotten flesh escaped her lips as she looked at only me. I wanted to retch, but the bile was caught in the bottom of my throat. The old woman was staring at me. She opened her old, withered mouth, and long strands of reddish saliva started to flow from the edge of her lips. It dripped down in long strands until it touched the ground. "Girl, you look delicious, and I am ever so hungry. I'm going to eat you now. I'm going to turn you into a fish. I do love eating raw fish. I will turn you into my food, and you will fill up my belly." Her croaky voice filled me with dread. I knew exactly what this old woman was. Mama and Papa told stories to my brothers and sisters about this beast. These tales have been handed down over the centuries, and in our country, this creature is known as an Aswang. I had to flee, but I couldn't move. Her invisible hands held me in place. I felt like a wounded bird stuck in a hunter's trap. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape her hideous grasp. The Aswang started limping and dragging her old decaying corpse towards me. Her feet scraped against the dirt, kicking up devils made of dust. Even they wanted to flee this beast. Her dark eyes were coming closer and closer. There was no escape. Those damn black fingernails were starting to reach for me. They were seeking my eyes. They were a hairbreadth away from me. I could see the jagged, cracked edges of her nails. She was going to rip out my eyes, I thought, panicking. A rustling came from my right-hand side. Without warning, my friend burst through the sugarcane. She stopped for a moment, and her face had a look of pure horror on it. This was just enough to distract the crone for a split second. Her eyes left me for a moment to look at the intruder. My body loosened up for just a second, and finally, it was my own. I took advantage of it. I pushed myself off the ground and reached and snatched my friend's hands. Vegetables flew in several directions, but we were running before they hit the ground. I started dragging her through the labyrinth of the green and gold stalks. The stalks hit my face painfully. I didn't care. We had to escape from the Aswang. My friend was screaming at me to stop, but I ignored her and I dragged her further and further away. I knew we would suffer if we stopped. All I could say to her was "Aswang" as we kept running. We finally stopped near the edge of the field. My legs could barely keep moving. They felt like they were on fire. Turning around, I looked behind us. In the distance was the old woman, running on all four limbs like a twisted animal hybrid. Her lips curled in a snarl, and red spit escaped her mouth, flying into the air as she ran towards us. Her fingers curled into claws as she dug at the ground, sending chunks of dirt and rock flying as she pursued us. A shrill scream cut through the sugarcane, piercing my ears and causing me to wince painfully. We both turned and started running. The ground slipped hard against my bare feet. I was unaware where I'd lost my slippers, but I didn't care. I ran. How could this damn thing keep up with us? Before we could proceed, a large man ran out of the sugarcane. He looked concerned. He had on a pair of brown pants, no shirts, and his body shined with sweat. In his right hand was a large machete. And then I recognized him. Diddle Diddle, my father's friend. He was about to speak, but I started screaming "Aswang" and pointing towards the old woman. Without a word, Tito took off into the sugarcane towards the Aswang. He raised the machete over his head, much like the heroes of old, as he disappeared into the sugarcane. We sat on the edge of the road, tears flowing like a river. Finally, Tito came back. He knelt next to us and whispered for us to run home as quickly as possible. He didn't find the old woman. She was somewhere, hiding in the sugarcane. Now, dear viewers, Here's a warning. When you visit the Philippines, you need to be careful. The Aswang can take many forms. An old woman, dog, rat, bat, or birds. Or they can wear their natural form as a distorted, twisted human. They are dressed with long, sharp claws, jagged fangs, and a long, slender tongue. They can squeeze through the cracks of the roof, the floor, or the walls, seeking their prey. Young children, babies, and the unborn in the womb are the Aswang's favourite treats. They will go to great lengths to ensure that they find their favourite meal. So if you see an old lady with blood red eyes, frizzy white hair, make sure you run. And you run as fast as your legs can carry you. Or maybe you might just become her next meal. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed tonight's lullaby. If you like my content, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, keep watching for what's in the dark.